The bright morning sun cast long shadows across the private airport terminal as Dr. Maya Richardson pulled up in her modest black Tesla. She checked her watch, 8:30 a.m., right on schedule for her flight to Singapore. The morning air was crisp, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of jet fuel and freshly cut grass across the tarmac. Maya was never one for flashy displays of wealth. At 42 years old, she had built her tech company, Global Tech Solutions, from the ground up, turning it into a $2 billion enterprise. Yet she still carried the same worn leather briefcase her father had given her when she graduated from MIT 15 years ago. Her simple navy blazer and black pants were chosen for comfort during the long flight ahead, not to impress anyone. As she stepped out of her car, the heels of her practical shoes clicked against the pavement. A young valet rushed forward, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized her from the company's website. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, taking her car keys with a respectful nod. Maya smiled warmly at him, remembering her own humble beginnings. She had learned early in life that success wasn't about showing off. Growing up in a small apartment above her parents' bookstore in Chicago, Maya had watched her mother and father work tirelessly to put her through school. Their sacrifice had taught her the value of hard work and humility. Even now, as one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country, she preferred to let her work speak for itself. The private terminal was quiet at this hour. Through the large glass windows, Maya could see her jet being prepared for departure. The sight still amazed her sometimes, not the jet itself, but what it represented. 10 years ago, she had been coding in her tiny apartment, surviving on instant noodles and coffee. Now her software helped millions of people around the world, and her company employed thousands. As she walked toward the terminal entrance, Maya mentally reviewed her schedule. The meeting in Singapore could change everything. Global Tech was about to launch a new artificial intelligence platform that could revolutionize healthcare in developing countries. Years of research, countless late nights, and the dreams of her entire team were riding on this presentation. She reached for her phone to check one last email when a security guard stepped into her path. Maya didn't notice his expression at first, too absorbed in her thoughts about the upcoming meeting. She simply reached for her identification, a routine she had performed hundreds of times before at airports around the world. The morning sun caught the silver thread in her neatly braided hair, and she adjusted the strap of her briefcase. The leather was soft from years of use, its surface marked with tiny scratches that told the story of countless business trips, pitch meetings, and late-night coding sessions. Inside were the contracts that could change millions of lives, if she could just get to that meeting in Singapore. Maya had faced obstacles before. As one of the few black women in tech leadership, she had grown accustomed to being underestimated. But she had always let her success speak for itself. Her company's growth spoke volumes, from a small startup to a global leader in healthcare technology. The numbers didn't lie. Global Tech software had already helped diagnose rare diseases in rural areas where doctors were scarce. The guard's stance was rigid, his hand raised in a stopping motion. Maya noticed his name tag, Kevin Wells. She had learned to pay attention to details like that. That often came in handy later. The morning breeze picked up, carrying the sound of jet engines being tested somewhere on the tarmac. Other travelers were starting to arrive, their expensive cars pulling up to the terminal one by one. Maya took a deep breath, ready to show her credentials and get on with her day. She had a plane to catch, a meeting to attend, and lives to change. The morning sun continued to climb in the sky, unaware that it was about to witness an incident that would spark conversations across the globe. Little did Maya know that in the next few minutes, everything would change. The quiet morning at the private terminal was about to become the setting for a story that would inspire millions and challenge deep-seated prejudices in corporate America. Kevin Wells stood firmly in Maya's path, his face set in a hard expression. He looked at her with cold eyes, not even glancing at the identification she was ready to show. The morning that had started so peacefully was about to take an unexpected turn. "The main terminal is that way," Kevin said loudly, pointing toward the commercial airport building in the distance. His voice carried across the quiet terminal, making several heads turn. He spoke as if talking to a child, each word dripping with disrespect. "This is the private aviation area, private jets only." Maya remained calm, though her heart began to beat faster. She had dealt with situations like this before, but it never got easier. "I understand, sir," she said politely, holding out her credentials. "I'm Dr. Maya Richardson. My jet is scheduled for departure to Singapore at 9:15. Kevin crossed his arms, ignoring her extended documentation. "Right," he said with a mocking laugh. "And I'm the Queen of England." A few other passengers nearby stopped to watch, some pulling out their phones. The valet who had parked Maya's car looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot near the entrance. "Sir, if you could just check my credentials." Maya tried again, but Kevin cut her off with a wave of his hand. The leather briefcase felt heavy in her hand now, its precious contracts waiting inside. Time was ticking away, and her meeting in Singapore wouldn't wait forever. "Listen, lady," Kevin said, taking a step closer. "I've worked here for 15 years. I know who belongs and who doesn't." His words hung in the air like poison. More people had stopped to watch now, creating a small crowd near the terminal entrance. Maya took a deep breath, remembering her mother's words from years ago. "Your dignity is not up for debate." She stood straighter, her 5'6" frame somehow seeming taller. "Mr. Wells," she said, reading his name tag again, "I am the CEO of Global Tech Solutions. That jet," she pointed to the sleek aircraft visible through the windows, "belongs to my company." Kevin's face turned red. Instead of checking her credentials, he reached for his radio. "Security backup to main entrance," he barked into it. "We have an uncooperative individual refusing to leave the private terminal." The crackle of radio static filled the air as he waited for a response. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably her pilot wondering why she hadn't boarded yet. The morning sun that had seemed so pleasant earlier now felt hot and harsh on her skin. She could feel the stares of other passengers, some sympathetic, others just curious about the unfolding drama. 2 more security guards appeared quickly, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Maya noticed that several people were now openly recording the incident on their phones. In the age of social media, nothing stayed private for long. "What seems to be the problem?" one of the new guards asked, looking between Maya and Kevin. Before Maya could answer, Kevin spoke up. "This woman claims she owns a private jet, refuses to leave when asked." The way he said, "this woman," made it clear what he really meant. Maya reached into her briefcase, pulling out not just her ID, but also the jet's registration papers. Her hands were steady, even though inside she felt a mix of anger and sadness. How many times would she have to prove herself? How many doors would be slammed in her face before people learned to look past their prejudices? The morning light streaming through the terminal's glass walls created long shadows on the floor. Maya could see her jet through the window, its engines being prepared for takeoff. The pilot would be waiting, the flight plan filed, everything ready except for one small-minded man who couldn't believe that a black woman could own a private jet. The crowd had grown larger now. Some in the back called out, "Check her ID." Another voice added, "This is ridiculous." The support from strangers was touching. But Maya knew she had to handle this her way. She had built her success on staying professional, even when others weren't. The situation was about to reach its turning point, but no one knew just how far the ripples from this morning would spread. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, and this quiet morning at a private terminal was about to become one of those moments. The tension in the private terminal had reached a breaking point. Maya stood calmly, her documents still extended, while the 3 security guards huddled together, whispering and throwing suspicious glances her way. The morning had turned into an unexpected test of patience. "Let me explain one more time," Maya said, her voice clear and steady. She pulled out her company phone, opening the Global Tech Solutions website. "Here is our company page with my photo and biography. Here are my flight documents. And here," she said, pulling up another screen, "is the live tracking of my jet, scheduled for departure in 30 minutes. Kevin Wells barely glanced at the phone. Instead, he turned to his colleagues. "She could have faked all of that," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Anyone can make a website these days." The crowd of onlookers had grown even larger, and the whispers of disapproval were getting louder. A young woman in the crowd stepped forward, her own phone in hand. "I just Googled her," she announced. "She's Dr. Maya Richardson. She was on the cover of Business Weekly last month." The woman turned her phone around, showing a picture of Maya giving a speech at a tech conference. Kevin's face turned a deeper shade of red, but he stood his ground. "That doesn't prove anything," he insisted. "For all we know, she could have stolen someone's identity." His words caused a ripple of angry mutters from the watching crowd. Maya checked her watch again, 25 minutes until her scheduled departure. The contracts in her briefcase needed to be in Singapore by tomorrow morning. Years of work, millions in research, and the hopes of countless patients in developing countries were at stake. She thought about all the young girls who looked up to her, who saw her success as proof that they could break through barriers too. What would they learn from how she handled this moment? Maya straightened her blazer and tried one more time. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice firm but professional, "I understand you're trying to do your job. Security is important. But you haven't even looked at my identification. You made assumptions about me the moment I walked in. Is this how you treat all your passengers?" One of the other security guards, a younger man with kind eyes, finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, may I see your documents?" he asked politely. Maya handed them over, noting how Kevin glared at his colleague. The young guard studied her ID, checked her flight documentation, and looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Everything appears to be in order," he said quietly, but Kevin snatched the papers from his hands. "These could be fake," Kevin insisted. "We need to verify them with the main office." He seemed desperate now, looking for any reason to prove he was right. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people. Many had their phones out, recording everything. Someone in the back shouted, "This is discrimination." Another voice added, "Call the airport manager." The situation was turning into exactly what Maya had tried to avoid, a public spectacle. Maya's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her pilot. "Is everything okay? We need to start boarding soon to maintain our flight schedule." She took a deep breath, remembering all the times she had faced doubt and discrimination on her way to success. Through the terminal windows, she could see the ground crew finishing their preparations. The morning sun now highlighted every detail of her jet, the Global Tech Solutions logo clearly visible on its tail. Just beyond it, other private jets sat waiting for their owners who probably never had to prove they belonged. The young security guard was now on his phone, speaking quietly but urgently to someone. Kevin stood with his arms crossed, still blocking the way to the boarding area. The third guard looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly unsure what to do. Maya thought about her parents, about their small bookstore in Chicago. They had taught her to face injustice with dignity, to fight ignorance with knowledge. Now, standing in this private terminal with all eyes on her, their lessons felt more important than ever. The next few minutes would change everything, though no one knew it yet. Sometimes the biggest victories come from the most difficult moments, and Maya Richardson was about to turn this confrontation into something much more significant than a simple misunderstanding at an airport. The situation at the private terminal had reached a critical point. Kevin Wells, now sweating visibly under his security uniform, grabbed his radio again. His hand shook slightly as he pressed the top button. "I need a supervisor to the main entrance immediately," he barked. "We have a possible security breach." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. She had faced moments like this before, in college classrooms, in boardrooms, at investment meetings. But this time was different. This time, there were witnesses. "A security breach?" Someone from the crowd called out. "She's shown you everything." The voice belonged to an elderly businessman who had been watching the scene unfold. Others joined in, their voices rising in protest. The terminal, usually quiet and exclusive, now echoed with the sounds of angry passengers. The young security guard who had checked Maya's documents earlier stepped closer to her. "Mr. Wells," he said quietly, "I really think we should." But Kevin cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Martinez, stay out of this. I've been doing this job since before you were born." Maya's phone buzzed again, another message from her pilot. "Dr. Richardson, we're going to miss our takeoff slot if we don't board in the next 15 minutes. The stakes were getting higher. The Singapore meeting wasn't just about business. It was about bringing affordable healthcare technology to remote villages. 2 more security guards arrived, followed by a man in a dark suit who must have been from airport management. They pushed through the crowd, which had now grown to nearly 50 people. Phones were recording from every angle, capturing Kevin's increasingly aggressive stance. "This woman," Kevin announced to the newcomers, pointing at Maya, "is trying to access a private jet with suspicious documentation." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his nervousness. "She refuses to leave the premises." Maya stepped forward, her voice clear and controlled. "I haven't refused anything," she said. "I've shown my identification, my company credentials, and my flight documentation. What I refuse to do is accept being discriminated against." The crowd erupted in supportive murmurs. A young woman in a business suit called out, "I'm streaming this live on social media." Another person shouted, "My brother's a civil rights lawyer. Want his number?" The pressure in the terminal was building like a pot about to boil over. The man in the dark suit looked increasingly worried. He glanced between Maya's professional demeanor and Kevin's defensive posture. Through the terminal windows, the morning sun illuminated Maya's jet, its polished surface gleaming. The Global Tech Solutions logo was clearly visible, matching the letterhead on the documents Maya had shown. "We have procedures," Kevin insisted, his voice rising. "We can't just let anyone walk in claiming they own a private jet." He was gesturing wildly now, his face red with a mix of anger and embarrassment. For all we know, she could be part of a security threat. A ripple of disbelief ran through the crowd. Several people started typing furiously on their phones, likely sharing the unfolding drama on social media. Maya could almost see the story spreading across the internet. Another example of prejudice in a place of privilege. The young guard, Martinez, finally spoke up again. "Sir, I ran her ID through our system. It's completely valid. Dr. Richardson is exactly who she says she is." His words hung in the air, but Kevin seemed beyond listening to reason. Maya checked her watch one more time. 10 minutes until she would miss her takeoff slot. The contracts in her briefcase felt heavier than ever. In Singapore, a room full of healthcare ministers would be waiting for her presentation. Lives literally hung in the balance. The man in the dark suit was now on his phone, speaking rapidly in hushed tones. More airport staff had gathered at the edges of the crowd, their faces showing a mix of concern and embarrassment. This was quickly becoming more than just a security incident. No one in the terminal that morning knew they were witnessing a moment that would soon go viral, sparking conversations about privilege, prejudice, and power across the globe. But Maya knew one thing for certain. This was the moment when staying silent was no longer an option. Through the growing chaos in the terminal, a new voice suddenly cut through the noise. "Dr. Richardson." The call came from across the terminal, where a tall man in a pilot's uniform was quickly walking toward the crowd. It was Captain James Anderson, Maya's regular pilot for the past 3 years. The captain's face showed a mix of concern and confusion as he made his way through the group of onlookers. His uniform was crisp, his captain's stripes gleaming in the morning light. "I was wondering why you hadn't boarded yet," he said, looking around at the tense scene. Kevin Wells's face went pale. He watched as Captain Anderson approached Maya with a respectful nod. "Good morning, Dr. Richardson. We're running behind schedule for our Singapore flight. Is everything all right here?" The pilot's presence changed the entire atmosphere of the terminal. Maya gave a small, tired smile. "Captain Anderson, it seems there's some confusion about my right to be here." Her voice remained professional, but everyone could hear the weight of the morning's events in her words. The crowd watched in silence as understanding dawned on the pilot's face. "Confusion?" Captain Anderson looked shocked. "Dr. Richardson is one of our most frequent flyers. I've been her pilot for 3 years." He turned to Kevin, his expression hardening. "She owns the Global Tech Solutions jet, the one I'm supposed to be flying to Singapore in." He checked his watch, less than 10 minutes. The man in the dark suit, who had been on his phone, suddenly stepped forward. "Mr. Wells, a word please." His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Kevin's face had gone from pale to ashen, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The crowd began to murmur again, but this time with satisfaction. Someone in the back started clapping, and soon others joined in. Maya raised her hands slightly, silencing them. She had never wanted applause. She had only wanted to be treated with basic respect. "I'd just spoken with the airport director," the man in the dark suit announced. "Dr. Richardson, on behalf of the airport authority, I want to express our deepest apologies." He handed her his business card. "I'm Thomas Wright, head of terminal security. This incident will be thoroughly investigated." Kevin stood frozen, his security badge seeming to weigh heavily on his chest. The young guard, Martinez, had a look of vindication on his face. He had tried to prevent this situation from escalating, but his senior officer hadn't listened. Captain Anderson checked his tablet. Dr. Richardson, we can still make our slot if we board now. The ground crew is ready, and your flight plan is approved. He gestured toward the jet, where the boarding stairs were already in position. Maya nodded, but before turning to leave, she faced Kevin one last time. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I hope you learned something from this morning. The next person you profile might not have a pilot to vouch for them, might not have an audience to witness it, might not have the strength to stand their ground. Think about that." The crowd parted to let her through, many nodding in respect. Some were still recording, their phones capturing every moment of this resolution. Through the terminal windows, the morning sun highlighted Maya's jet, as if nature itself was pointing out the truth that had been there all along. Thomas Wright was already on his phone again, likely dealing with the PR crisis that was unfolding. The video footage would be online within minutes, if it wasn't already. Kevin Wells stood rooted to the spot, watching as Maya walked toward her jet with Captain Anderson. As they approached the boarding stairs, Maya heard the muffled sounds of applause from inside the terminal, but her mind was already shifting to Singapore, to the healthcare ministers waiting for her presentation, to the lives that could be changed by Globaltech's new technology. Sometimes the biggest victories come wrapped in the most difficult moments. As Maya climbed the stairs to her jet, she knew that this morning's incident would have repercussions far beyond the simple case of discrimination at an airport terminal. Change was coming, one moment of truth at a time. By the time Maya's jet landed in Singapore, the video of the airport incident had gone viral. Millions of people around the world had watched the confrontation unfold, and social media was exploding with reactions. The hashtag #ToRichardson effect was trending globally. Maya sat in her hotel room after successfully delivering her healthcare presentation, scrolling through her phone. Her email inbox was flooded with interview requests from major news networks. CNN, BBC, MSNBC, they'd all wanted to hear her story. But Maya wasn't interested in becoming famous. She wanted to create change. "Dr. Richardson, have you seen this?" Her assistant Sarah called from the adjoining room. She rushed in with her tablet, showing Maya a video that had just been uploaded. It showed a young black girl, maybe 12 years old, standing in front of her class giving a presentation. "I want to be like Dr. Maya Richardson," the girl was saying, her voice full of determination. She showed that we shouldn't let anyone tell us where we belong. The video had already gotten hundreds of thousands of views, with parents and teachers sharing it across platforms. Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. This was exactly why she couldn't stay silent anymore. She picked up her phone and called Marcus, her company's PR director. "I think it's time we did something bigger than just making technology," she said. "We need to address this directly." The next morning, Maya sat down with her team in the Singapore office. They spent hours drafting a plan that would turn this incident into something positive. Globaltech Solutions would launch a new initiative, Belong Everywhere Foundation. Back in America, the airport was facing its own storm. The video had prompted thousands of people to share their own stories of discrimination in supposedly exclusive spaces. The airport's social media accounts were overwhelmed with demands for action. Thomas Wright, the head of terminal security, had already begun making changes. Kevin Wells was placed on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation. But more importantly, the airport announced a complete overhaul of its security training program. "We need to address the root of the problem," Maya told her board members via video conference. "This isn't just about one security guard or one airport. It's about changing the way people think about who belongs where." The Belong Everywhere Foundation would offer scholarships to minority students in aviation and technology. It would also provide training programs for companies about recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. Maya insisted that Kevin Wells be invited to be one of the first participants, not as punishment, but as an opportunity for growth. News channels played clips of the incident repeatedly, but they also showed Maya's response, how she had maintained her dignity throughout the confrontation. Business schools began using the incident as a case study in crisis management and leadership. Social media continued to buzz with activity. People shared their own stories using #ToRichardson effect, describing moments when they stood their ground against discrimination. The hashtag became a symbol of quiet strength and professional resistance. Young professionals started posting photos of themselves in spaces where they had been told they didn't belong: corporate boardrooms, academic conferences, exclusive clubs. Each post tagged with hashtag #DeRichardsson effect showed another barrier being broken. Maya's inbox filled with messages from parents thanking her for showing their children how to handle discrimination with grace. Teachers asked permission to use her story in their lessons about civil rights and modern-day prejudice. Global Tech's stock price actually rose in the days following the incident. Investors saw Maya's handling of the situation as proof of her exceptional leadership skills. The company received hundreds of job applications from people who wanted to work for a leader who stood up for what was right. The young security guard, Martinez, was promoted to a training position where he would help implement the new bias awareness programs. He sent Maya a thank you note, telling her that watching her stand her ground had inspired him to speak up more often against injustice. As Maya prepared for her flight back home, she thought about that morning at the airport. One incident, captured on video, had sparked a movement. Sometimes the biggest changes start with one person simply refusing to accept discrimination as normal. The world was watching, learning, and changing. And Maya Richardson, the woman who had just wanted to catch her flight, had become a symbol of something much bigger than herself. 3 weeks after the airport incident, Maya sat in her office overlooking the Chicago skyline. In front of her lay a letter from Kevin Wells. She had received hundreds of letters, but this one felt different. With steady hands, she opened the envelope and began to read. "Dr. Richardson," the letter began, "I've spent the past weeks thinking about my actions that morning. I've watched the video countless times. Each time, I see something new, not just in your actions but in my own. I am deeply sorry." The words were handwritten, each letter carefully formed. Maya paused her reading as her assistant Sarah entered the office. "The foundation paperwork is ready," Sarah announced, placing a thick folder on the desk. "And Ellen DeGeneres called again. She really wants you on her show." Maya smiled but shook her head. She had declined all TV appearances, choosing instead to focus on creating real change. The Belong Everywhere Foundation was taking shape faster than anyone had expected. Major companies had stepped forward with millions in donations. Airlines offered partnership programs. Tech giants promised internships. What started as a response to discrimination was becoming a movement. Maya returned to Kevin's letter. "I've enrolled in the bias training program," he wrote. "At first, I was angry and defensive, but then I thought about my own daughter. She's 12, and she wants to be a pilot. How many people might tell her she doesn't belong there? I need to be part of the solution." Outside her office window, construction workers were installing the new foundation sign on the building next door. Maya had bought the entire floor, turning it into a training center. Soon it would be filled with programs teaching everything from coding to aviation, open to anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Anderson. He had just finished speaking at a pilot training school, sharing the story of that morning. "The students couldn't believe it," he wrote. But then 3 female students of color came up after and shared similar stories. "Things are changing, Dr. Richardson." Maya walked to her office window, watching the city below. She thought about her parents' small bookstore, how they had filled it with stories of people breaking barriers. Now she was writing her own chapter in that ongoing story. The Foundation's first initiative was already underway. They had identified 50 small airports across the country and were working with them to implement new training programs. The goal wasn't to punish, but to educate and create understanding. Sarah returned with more news. The airport authority called. "They've completely revised their security protocols. They're using your experience as a case study in their training. And Mr. Wells," she paused, checking her tablet, "he's been asked to help develop the new training program after he completes his own course." Maya nodded, remembering her own words that morning. Change comes one moment at a time. She picked up Kevin's letter again, reading the final paragraph. "My daughter saw the video. She asked me why I acted that way. I had no good answer. But thanks to you, she's learning a better way. We all are." The Foundation's website had already received thousands of applications for its programs. Young people from all backgrounds, each with their own stories of being told they didn't belong somewhere. Maya's team was working around the clock to process them all. A notification popped up on Maya's computer. Another video had gone viral. this time showing a young woman standing up to discrimination at a prestigious golf club. In the comments, people were referencing the hashtag #DeRichardson effect. The ripples were spreading. Maya's parents had taught her that true change doesn't come from fighting fire with fire, but from turning darkness into light. The foundation wasn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It was about creating opportunities, opening doors, and showing people a better way. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across her office, Maya finished reading Kevin's letter. She picked up her phone and did something she hadn't planned to do. She called her assistant. Sarah, set up a meeting with Kevin Wells. It's time we talked about making him part of the Foundation's training team. Sometimes the best response to discrimination isn't just standing up to it, it's helping others learn how to do better. Maya Richardson understood that the real power of her story wasn't in the viral video or the media attention. It was in the changes it inspired in people's hearts and minds. 6 months after the airport incident, Maya stood at a podium in the newly opened Belong Everywhere Foundation headquarters. The room was packed with faces that reflected the change she had helped create. In the front row sat Kevin Wells, wearing a Foundation trainer badge, next to his daughter who beamed with pride. When I walked into that airport terminal 6 months ago, Maya began, her voice carrying across the silent room, I was just trying to catch a flight. I never expected to start a movement. The audience laughed softly, many of them nodding in understanding. The Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Over 5,000 students were now enrolled in various programs across the country. Former security guard Kevin Wells had become one of their most effective trainers, using his own story to teach others about recognizing and overcoming bias. On the walls of the headquarters hung photographs of success stories. A young black woman in a pilot's uniform, standing proudly by her plane. A Hispanic teenager accepting an award for coding innovation. A Muslim woman in hijab giving a presentation at a tech conference. Each picture told a story of barriers broken. But the real change, Maya continued, gesturing to the screens behind her, is in the numbers. The screens displayed the latest statistics. Complaints of discrimination at private terminals had dropped by 60%. Employment diversity in aviation and tech sectors had increased by 35%. The Foundation's training programs had reached over 10,000 professionals. In the audience, Captain Anderson sat with a group of student pilots from diverse backgrounds. The airline industry had undergone significant changes, with major carriers implementing new training programs and hiring practices. The hashtag #DeRichardson effect had become a benchmark for corporate responsibility. Kevin Wells stood up to share his part of the story. I was the problem, he said honestly, his voice steady. But Dr. Richardson showed me I could also be part of the solution. His daughter squeezed his hand as he spoke. She was now enrolled in the Foundation's Young Aviators program, her dream of becoming a pilot closer than ever. The changes had spread far beyond the aviation industry. Companies across the country were reaching out to the Foundation for help in creating more inclusive environments. Maya's inbox still filled daily with stories of people finding courage to stand up against discrimination, inspired by her example. Thomas Wright, the airport security head, presented the results of their reformed training program. In the past 6 months, we've trained over 5,000 security personnel nationwide, he announced. The Richardson Protocol is now becoming the industry standard. The protocol emphasized respect, communication, and checking bias before making assumptions. Maya's global tech solutions had also transformed. The company had become known not just for its healthcare technology, but for its commitment to social change. The Singapore deal had been successful, and now their medical diagnostic software was helping people in remote villages across Asia. This isn't just about airports or private jets, Maya explained, showing slides of the Foundation's work. It's about changing the way we see each other. It's about questioning our assumptions. It's about creating spaces where everyone belongs. The young security guard Martinez, now a senior trainer, shared stories from the field. Airports across the country were reporting positive changes. Security staff were learning to handle situations with respect and professionalism. The viral video that had started it all was now used as a teaching tool. Kevin's daughter stood up to speak next. Because of Dr. Richardson, she said, her voice clear and confident. I know that no one can tell me where I don't belong, and because of my dad's change, I know that people can learn and grow. The Foundation had created scholarship programs, mentorship opportunities, and training modules, But more importantly, it had created hope. People who had once felt powerless against discrimination now had tools, support, and examples to follow. As the event concluded, Maya looked around the room. The morning at the airport felt like a lifetime ago. What could have been just another story of discrimination had become a catalyst for real change. The room was filled with people who had either found their place or helped others find theirs. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. Maya Richardson had shown that the response to discrimination didn't have to be anger or despair. It could be education, understanding, and the creation of new opportunities. That was the true #ToRichardson effect.